Research question and organizational need. Through my experience in marketing, one of the things that I saw that was pretty consistent was that most small to medium sized businesses or SMBs lack the resources to be able to analyze their data across multiple platforms. A lot of times their data is based on incomplete metrics and a lot of misallocation of budgets, which leads to then guesswork of where you should be advertising to generate the majority of your leads. So the research question that I asked was, which acquisition sources deliver customers with the highest long-term return on investment when evaluated through standardized cross-channel analytics? So that led to the development excuse me, of the platform Synevyr, which is that cross-channel analytics tool. So the GitHub is open sourced under the Carpathian, my company, and the Synevyr repository. So currently I'm cloning it in. I started it before I recorded the video just because it takes a little bit of time. But going into the setup, this is assuming that you would be running it on Mac OS. I configured it for Mac OS, being this is my primary test development machine. I already have Homebrew, MySQL, and Redis running. You're going to want to make sure that you install those. I will say the one thing is that it by default sets the root password within the platform so it can connect to SQL. So if you have a different password or you're already running MySQL, you'll need to update the keys.env file, which I'll get into that more in the video because I already have my own password set. So the first thing, we've already cloned the repository. So the next step is going to be to cd into the Synevyr root folder. So we can see it here. There's obviously currently no keys.env. It's going to generate that unique once the platform runs. So going into the front end, we're going to install the npm so we can use React. The front end is React, back end is a Flask backend. So I wanted this platform to be super easy that anybody could install and work inside of it. So cloning the repository is super straightforward, installing npm, and then actually setting it up. So the first thing that you're going to do is run the seed and bootstrapping script. So we're going to run me first. What this is going to do is create the virtual environment, install the dependencies, and then auto-generate that keys.env. It's going to fail when it goes to seed the synthetic data because obviously the MySQL password is wrong. So again, this is what you would do in your case if you don't have that MySQL. So pulling this over this file here. So we're in my documents, we open Synevyr. We can see we have the keys.env file. This is a different keys.env. We're going to go ahead and replace that. This now adds my password to it. Let's go ahead and close this and run our run me first again. So opening VS Code, one thing I want to note is that when you run this, it creates this bootstrap checklist. And it's going to skip the steps, so it's already created the virtual environment dependencies and the front and back end keys. So it'll just pretty much continue from where it left off. So the first thing it does is it loads the keys. It creates the database and tables. So if we open my SQL editor here and we scroll down to Synevyr, we can see that CRM customers exist, leads exist, and our WooCommerce orders. So what it's currently doing right now is seeding the synthetic data that we're going to be using. So now if we run this again on CRM customers, we should see a number of those leads. The synthetic data that it's generating here is going to be and we can see here that it finished creating the database and tables and seeding the data. The synthetic data that it's generating is meant to mimic an API. So for example, if I go on to api.synevyr and we go to public/customers, be an error on that. We'll do the local host. All right, so this is what it's going to return, whether you're pulling the customers, leads, or WooCommerce orders. There's all that data. This data is publicly available. Anyone can use it. It's going to be generated unique, but again, made to model actual customer data that I've seen when working with my own clients within the data analytics world. So one thing I'd like to talk about is specifically data governance. The reason I opted for this route was I wanted to mimic most closely what a data analytics professional or software engineer might see in the real world without running into privacy issues, because we are storing customer data within the platform. So jumping back in here, once this has finished its whole process of seeding, it's going to launch the platform itself. So we have here our backend. So if we pop open this, we can now see the API gateway. And then if this is going to be our Celery and Beat instance. So what this does is just schedules the background tasks. This here is the actual Celery function for our ETL pipeline. So it runs that in the background. And then we have our front end. So if we open this window here, and we can now see here is the Synevyr platform hosted on localhost. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create an account. Test email. We'll just do admin. It's going to go ahead and sign us up and pop us into the platform. So this is what the dashboard is going to look like, where you would be able to see your analytic data. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is to connect our data sources. This is going to be the data that we're going to pull into the platform. So just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to open that other window there so I can just copy and paste it. So we're going to, in this case, use other API. In an ideal world, if you select one of these, it's going to automatically populate part of the base URL, and then you have to put in your secret key. This is going to load the data into tables that fit the form of that data. In our case, since this is one of our own localhost API, we're just going to pull it in from customers. So we're going to call this one customers and create. And then our next one, whoopsie, we're going to call this one leads and leads create. And then our final one is going to be orders. And create. So now we have these three tables that we're going to be working with. Again, it's just the same URL that we're going to be pulling data from. And close that. So on the ETL pipeline, you can either extract the data by itself, or you can transform by itself, or you can run the entire pipeline. We're going to go ahead and extract it first. So let's go ahead and pop open SQL and see what we have. So scrolling down. So here's our data sources, our three APIs, and our user data set raw. So it looks like it didn't pull anything. I might have to make a small tweak to this. Let's go ahead and delete these really quick. I might have forgot to put the HTTP in there. Create, connect data source. Okay, so let's run through this again. So there's our leads extract. Okay, there we go. That looks much better. So you'd have to put in the HTTP, and I may add validation for that down the road. But what this is then going to do is it's going to work through those pages that I showed you earlier and just paginate through each page and begin to ingest that data. So if we open MySQL, a little bit about how this works. So again, though I have access to the data in these three tables of the public data, I wanted to emulate what it might actually look like if you're pulling data from a public API. So under our sources, it's going to have, these are our sources where we're getting our data, but then the user data set raw is where it's actually dumping all of that. So that's going to be, each record is its own within the content, and then there's a content hash, just so that if I was to run the same thing again, you're not going to see duplication of those records. So we can see where the switch source it came from, the user ID, and then obviously the individual ID of it. And then every time I refresh this, that number should be slightly larger. So it's currently, this can take a while depending on just how much data you have. This also goes through a little bit of data cleaning as well because of that content hash. So if you happen to have duplicate records in your CRM, this is going to clean it up. So again, I purposely created some duplicates in the seeding. We should have 500,000 records in here, but by the end of it, that number should be just a little bit smaller. It's taking a little bit of time to pull it out there. There we go. So yeah, 500,000 records. There are duplicates in here. It's for the most part pretty clean, but if we were pulling from like a platform like ConvertKit, this is what the data might look like, as well as potentially with some source IDs. So going back into our user data set raw, still working on pulling and populating those. So I'll kind of talk a little bit more about some of the issues that I ran into when it came into the process of building this platform. So initially, I pulled all of the data in and dumped it into just that user data set raw and had the front end process that. That was a lot of data for the front end to try to parse and process, and so naturally I ran into issues, and we just had a number of, it just lagged and it wasn't the right data. The other thing was that the data wasn't normalized, and so when trying to compare leads to orders to the customer records, naturally again we kept running into issues there because it couldn't attribute an order to a customer just because there was no normalization between that data. So we created this pipeline that the first step will extract it, just pull all the raw data from that API, dump it into that raw table, and then when we actually get to our transform step, that's going to then pull it from, so we'll go ahead and run the transform here. This also tends to take a little bit. So let's run this here. So then when it actually runs through and pulls this data, so you can see it's basically stored in JSON form. It's then going to dump it into these ETL cleaned tables. Then we'll have our leads cleaned, our customers cleaned, which is currently working on dumping those records into there, and then the orders clean. Again, this is very similar to what's in the public data. But as I said, for the sake of this project, I, again, wanted to closely imitate what a user might experience if they were pulling data from one of their platforms. So yeah, the first thing it's going to do is, populate this customers and then proceed to populate the leads and the orders, and then go through and clean that data and make sure that it's properly normalized. So we're using the email as our primary data joining. So if there's a lead that has that same email, then it'll assume it's the same person and associate them together. We ended up dropping the original customer ID just because that might not be super reliable. Same thing with the orders. A lot of the order data is going to have the email in there or some way to associate the two together. So like in our case here, we have a customer ID that we pull from the CRM table. So this is still working on parsing that. It has 70,000 records to process. Another thing I guess I think it'd be helpful to talk about is the limitation of the data set. A key limitation is the data obviously has to be updated regularly to remain accurate. So what I showed earlier with these two tasks here is that this is going to run every 6 to 12 hours to extract new data and transform that new data into the user's clean tables. So a user can initiate the initial pull. When you first connect a data source, it doesn't automatically, so it runs automatically every 6 hours. It doesn't automatically run until it reaches that timeline. We could also make it so that it initially runs. That just might be something for the future. As I grow out this CRM, I intend to add the ability where you can add a script to your website and see how many users are visiting, interactions that they're doing, have cookies so that we can be in compliance with privacy laws, as well as even pull in data from Google itself so that we can just compare things together. Again, this is supposed to be a fairly simple to use platform. Right now, just by dropping the URLs in, it's a little bit complicated and someone needs to have a bit of experience with it. But down the road, I'd like to have the single sign-on and really the ability to make this platform as easy to use as possible. So this is just about finished here. We'll go ahead and let this finish. Alrighty, just about done. I'm going to pull up MySQL again here. So our customer table should have the 64,000, so that's after it's gone through, removed any duplicates. Our leads clean should be the 10,000 leads with our statuses on those, the costs, so on and so forth, and then our orders. Those are all the orders that the database is storing. So once this is done, like I said, it's going to run every once in a while. It's pulled all the orders and the leads. If we go to our home dashboard, this is really where the value of the platform can be seen. So we can look at different date ranges for that data. But some of the things that I wanted to incorporate to make it easy for anybody to understand when looking at this is you can see the total number of leads you've generated in the last 30 days, the total number of orders, revenue, cost. This is going to be like your advertising cost if you're pulling that in from whether it's your CRM or you have an alternate data source. Billing information, again, that'll be built out more. That's in the public data tables, and then our total profit. So one of the cool things that I added here was the recommended actions. So depending on which metrics have the best performance, it's going to automatically adjust these. So if I change the date range, we might see, so you can see some of the numbers there, the ROI on the optimized referral changed as we went higher. And then if we go to all, that's obviously changing as well. So again, these will dynamically change depending on what the data that you're pulling from your data set looks like. But jumping into the data itself, so what we can really see here is our leads by platform and our spend by platform in our first charts. So we can see that within the past 30 days, we've generated 46 leads from direct traffic, email marketing, Google Ads, LinkedIn, Meta, and just from organic search. So what this is helpful to do is if you're pulling in leads from multiple sources and you're attributing those in your CRM or you're pulling the data directly from Meta. So what I'm doing here is Meta or the leads is its own isolated environment and the CRM is its own isolated environment. And we're comparing the names between the two to see, does this name exist in the CRM before it classifies it as a lead? Otherwise, they're just we'd consider it garbage. So if Meta is reporting that you generated 10,000 leads, but you're only seeing maybe 5,000 of those, we'd know, okay, those aren't actually making it in as a customer. I'm going to go ahead and pop the date range up a little bit here. Again, same thing, those numbers just go up a bit. We can see the referral, social organic, and from YouTube. The other thing that we can also see is our spend by platform. I can see that I've spent $4,400 on Google Ads, $1,200 on LinkedIn, and $3,800 on Meta. And then any of these little smaller ones here. Email, we spent about $61. YouTube, $84. So then sliding down, we'll go back to the 30 days. Sliding down here, we can then look at our ad spend versus revenue by platform. So if you wanted a quick snapshot on like, okay, are these platforms actually working to generate us profit? This is where you can look at it. So quick disclaimer is I tried to design the scale logarithmically because when you have something like your organic search, which generated $46,000, it kind of offset everything else. And so these smaller numbers, where it was like $500, was just incredibly squished down. So the higher it gets, it moves up logarithmically. But you could see, okay, Billboard, we're not really attributing this, but down the road, if we were able to pull that data or manually enter it, I could see we generated $1,200 because the lead told us that they saw our billboard. For our email marketing, we generated $7,800 in revenue, and we only spent $25. So that's absolutely fantastic. Super high ROI. And again, disclaimer is that these aren't exactly even. That's a little bit of work that I'm going to continue doing, is just to make the presentation look a bit better because it scales logarithmically. Looking at our Google ads, we generated $7,000. Our profit was $5,000, and our ad spend was $1,000. LinkedIn, we spent $500, generated nothing. Meta ads, our ROI is only 46% because we only generated $1,000, and we spent $1,300. So our profit was only, or $1,900 rather, excuse me. Profit was only $635. Organic search, that is obviously our biggest performer. We generated a ton of revenue from that, and obviously there was no spend on organic, so we might be able to extrapolate from that okay, we really need to work on the website SEO, other, just again uncategorized, and then finally our referrals. We could see, okay, hey, maybe we need to have more referral incentives, because really email marketing, organic search, and referral are our biggest generators, which is consistent with what we see up here. We have a high lead volume at low cost. Be great to scale for growth. Scale up our email marketing. That's our most profitable channel. And then optimize referral. That's where we have the highest conversion rate and get the highest quality leads. So then scrolling down, we can see our ROI by source. Just doing a quick look at these ones. Because there's no cost on these, they're all going to be the 99.9. Finally, we can then look and see our daily trends. Just a bar chart of how many leads we're generating, as well as how much revenue. Ideally, from this, we'd be able to establish some kind of correlation. So we pump up our leads. We got a bunch of leads there, and then we see shortly thereafter, kind of with a lagging indicator, some spikes in sales. We also were continuing to generate leads, and then kind of a little bit of slowing down. We aren't really generating as many leads, so we see a decline in our revenue. So we try to pump that back up again. So just someone could pull from this that, okay, we need to continue pushing money into the sources that are generating the most leads. That might be by organic search. So then finally, the last thing is, if you didn't want to see the charts, you didn't want to see the graph, you could just look down at the detailed performance by source. So you could see down here exactly how many orders did billboards attributed customers, how much revenue did we generate, how much of that was profit, what was the ROI, and then the average order value of people from there. So we could see that, okay, billboards, pretty good. Organic search, they tend to buy the most. Referrals tend to buy the most. So I, as a decision maker, might determine that referral, organic search, and billboards tend to be the best. The difficulty with the charts when you're trying to figure out what your ROI is just that you can't always attribute everything. But being able to see this here is fantastic. So I know, okay, LinkedIn, what a waste of time. We have 23 leads. They ended up becoming customers, but they didn't purchase us. They didn't purchase anything. And so maybe we need to do some more nurturing for our meta ads. They tend to buy. So overall, we can see that platforms like YouTube and LinkedIn maybe aren't our best because we're spending a lot of money on those. Maybe if we even expand this to all time and we take a look at that, we can see, yeah, we've really been spending a lot of money on advertising on LinkedIn, but it's not generating us anything. Same thing with YouTube. Social organic, okay, people come from there, but they don't end up buying anything, so we might not want to have as strong a calls to action. But this is really where you begin to see the biggest numbers. Our referral, our organic search, and our email marketing, then over the longest period of time, over the lifetime of our company, tend to have the best results. So overall, Synevyr is a platform that is meant to make doing data analytics easier for the decision makers. It's going to be an ongoing project. This is not the end of the platform. The whole connecting data sources process was really meant to supply the needs of this assignment. But down the road, like I said, this is going to transform into something that is usable and super easy for anybody to simply connect their platforms to. So thank you for watching, and if you run into any issues trying to set this up, please feel free to reach out to me.